Thank you for joining us. Very happy to announce that today we have Nick Waters talking to us about the way that our brain uses neuronal information to make thought. Is that right, Nick?
Yes. Thanks, Ted.
Well,
Should
thank you very much. Nick is an old student of mine who has moved, as we were just talking about, from doing pure math to basically doing rather applied stuff and some work with AI as well. So some of this will come out, I think, during the talk. But without further ado, please take it away, Nick.
Thanks, Ted, and thank you all for coming. I'm reading the chat now. I don't look very old. Thank you. I take that as a compliment. I'm a postdoc at MIT studying neuroscience, and I'll just get started here. I'm gonna screen share. Uh, Give me a moment to do some Zoom management. Uh, okay, great. And share computer sound. Okay. Uh, I hope everybody can see this. And please, if you have questions throughout this talk, just interrupt, shout, scream. I can't see you all. But the more interactive this is, the better. So today I'll be talking about some ideas on how we can understand the neural basis of thought. This is some of the work that I did during my PhD, and I'm excited to share it with you. So, outline. I'll start by saying a few words about motivation and background, focusing on cognition in the brain. Then I'll talk a little bit about data collection, recording neural activity. Then I'll talk about data analysis, in particular modeling neural activity. And I'll wrap up with a few words on future directions in neuroscience and AI. Okay, let's get started with motivation and background. So we do a lot of cognitive behaviors on a daily basis. One that I'd like to focus on today is our ability to mentally track a moving object. So suppose you're standing at a crosswalk trying to cross a street. You look to the right and you see an approaching car. You observe the state of the car, it's moving towards you. Then you turn, look to the left, check if there's something coming from that direction. While you're doing this, you can still mentally track the car that's approaching from the right, even if you're not looking at it at the moment. For example, if you then look back to the right, you can predict the state of the car. You expect it to now be closer to you, approaching the crosswalk. And the question that I'll be asking is, how does this mental tracking work in the brain, where you can predict the motion of an object even when you're not directly looking at it? So I want to seed you with a few hypotheses for how we could do this. One idea is the idea of simulation. So the idea here is that when you're mentally tracking a moving object, you have a real-time state of that object that you're updating in your brain, even if you're not directly observing the object. So in this schematic, the x-axis is time, the y-axis is the mental position of the car, and during the mental tracking period, the mental position of the car is updated in your brain as the car moves through time, even though you're not looking at it. This is one possibility. Another way to view this is that the plot of mental car position over time is a kind of continuous increasing function. The brain says it's here, now it's here, now it's here, now it's here. This isn't the only way you could be doing this. Another possibility I'll call procrastination, which you can think of as just-in-time or lazy evaluation. So the idea here is that while you're not observing the car, you don't simulate its motion. Instead, you just remember where it was when you last saw it. And then when you have to predict where it is now, you very rapidly extrapolate based off of its last observed state and the elapsed time where it must be now. Are
Can
there
I ask,
any?
Nick? Yeah, I was
Yes.
just going to ask. I want to. I like that you're trying to juxtapose three different potential theories here, and I just want to understand better the difference. Is it a difference, do you think, about how the brain encodes the information or how it processes that encoding?
These are the difference between simulation and procrastination are really about how the brain processes the information, and in particular, when you're not observing the moving object that you're thinking about.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This will also become more clear when we actually talk about a specific task. But are there other questions or ideas about these hypotheses? I hope now you might already have some idea for which, if either of these, you do when you're trying to cross a street. Okay, well then let's move on and talk a little bit about brain function. Here's the brain. If you zoom in on a patch of brain, you'll see a whole bunch of brain cells called neurons that are connected to each other. If you look in the cortex, the outer layer of the brain, these cells are organized into layers. And if you zoom in on a particular neuron, you'll find that the neuron receives inputs from many upstream neurons and then gives outputs to many downstream neurons. And the way the information is transmitted is by electrical impulses. So if you record the voltage of this neuron over time, you'll see that periodically it has a voltage spike, which we call a spike or an action potential or the neuron firing. When the neuron has a spike, when it fires, at that moment it transmits electrical information to the downstream neurons. This is roughly how the brain works, and the brain has approximately 86 billion of these neurons. Now, when you're looking at the crosswalk in the car trying to cross a street, that visual information goes into your eyes, and then it gets sent to the visual cortex, which is actually all the way in the back of the brain. From the visual cortex, there are a few pathways that the information then takes. Some of them converge on a brain area called dorsal prefrontal cortex. Prior work has shown that this particular area near the front of the brain is very involved in predicting the motion of objects and working memory. So this is an area that we're going to focus on today. Okay, that's it for motivation and background. We'll now talk about how we record neural activity. Are there any questions before I press on?
Yes, I have a question. Do you think that, in other words, rather, I should say, is your intent in terms of motivation to say that we're going to try to find measurable neural correlates that will distinguish between these three theories?
Yes.
So in other words, whether or not the brain is continually simulating something even when it's not being asked to produce an output, as opposed to it's doing it on the fly when it needs it.
Exactly. We're going to look in the brain to try to see which, if either of these, is happening.
Thank you.
Great. So to do that, we can't record neural data from humans crossing a street. So we use lab animals, in particular monkeys, and we train them to do a mental tracking task that they can play on a computer screen while we record from their brains. And here's how this mental tracking task works. It's reminiscent of crossing a street, but doable on a computer screen in a controlled manner. Every trial begins with a fixation, where the monkey is trained to look at this little white cross in the center of the screen. The square represents the computer monitor that the monkey's looking at. And I'm rendering the monkey's eye position in the green cross. So the green cross is where the monkey's looking. Then a stimulus appears consisting of a moving object, in this case an apple. It moves along this red arrow trajectory, and it bounces off the walls of the display with deterministic kinematics. Every trial, it appears at a different position and moves in a different way. After 1 second of stimulus, it disappears, becomes invisible for a random duration, half a second to 1.2 seconds. Here I'm showing a ghost of the object, but in reality, the monkey doesn't see anything during this phase. In this time, it's supposed to mentally track the object. To test whether it's actually tracking the object, we quiz the monkey afterwards. We present a cue, which is an image in the middle of the screen that tells the monkey, okay, estimate where the object is right now. So after that appears, The monkey responds by moving its eyes rapidly to its estimate of where the object is now. And then we reveal the object to show the monkey whether it got it right or not. And if the monkey did get it right, we give it some mango juice. Sorry about that. It looked like we had a Zoom bomber that
Yeah.
appeared for a couple minutes.
Yeah. So, but my question was, how do we know, how does the monkey know that when you show them the little apple in the middle, that will make them sort of, it's like a cue that tells them, okay, now guess where they are.
It is a cue, and we train the monkey to do this.
That's what I meant. So there's some training involved there. Okay.
There's some training involved. Exactly. And the idea is that during the invisible phase, when the object's not visible, the monkey is mentally tracking it, which is the computation that we're interested in studying. To give you a sense of the task, I'm going to play a video for you where you can see this task in action. You're looking at what the monkey's looking at. I've rendered the monkey's gaze position with the green cross so you can see where it's looking. And I hope this gives you a sense of the task. So the object appears, it disappears, then the cue appears, and the monkey responds by looking at it. The trials happen kind of rapidly, but let's watch it for a little bit, and hopefully it makes sense. You can see that as soon as the monkey looks to the object, it appears, showing where the object actually is, but only after the monkey's made its response. Is everybody happy with the task? Any questions about it? I hope this video also gives you a sense of what it's like playing this task. You feel like you're tracking the moving object. Okay.
Yeah, I'm impressed how quickly the monkey, I mean, this is real time that you're showing?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm
This is a
impressed how
well-trained
quickly
monkey.
they do it. Yeah, very well trained, yeah.
Yes. But you get the hang of it. If you practice this for an hour or two, you get the hang of the pace of the task. Okay, so let's bring back our hypotheses and talk about them in the context of this task. I'm going to show you this particular trial where the object's moving along this trajectory. In the invisible phase, I'm actually showing a ghost of the object so we can see where it is. And we already talked about the simulation hypothesis, which says that the monkey's mental position of the object tracks the real position of the object even while it's invisible. I'm using the blue ring to represent the mental position of the object. And as we saw earlier, we can plot this in terms of mental position versus real position, which shows a linear relationship, including during the invisible phase of the task. Putting this into equations, we can write the mental position of the object in the monkey's mind as a function of time is the same as the real position of the object as a function of time. We also mentioned the procrastination hypothesis, where during the invisible phase, the mental position doesn't update. It just remembers the last observed state of the object throughout the invisible phase. And in the invisible phase, you can write this as the mental position of time is the real position at the time the object disappeared. I want to bring up a third hypothesis that I'll call anticipation, which is kind of the opposite of procrastination. In this case, the mental position of the object looks ahead of where the object is, anticipating where it's going to be at some time in the future, maybe the time at which the monkey expects it's going to have to respond. So in this case, the mental position jumps up when the object becomes invisible, anticipating where the object's going to be. And the mental position as a function of time is the real position at the future response time. So these are three hypotheses that we can imagine. The monkey could be using each of these, we don't know. And to test these hypotheses, we're going to have to look in neural data. So let's talk about which of these hypotheses.
1 second, Nick.
Yes.
With the anticipation, right? I just want to understand it better. Doesn't it need to know something about the time in order to be able to extrapolate adequately?
Yeah, that's a great point. So it doesn't know when it's going to be quizzed on where the object is, which means that if it anticipates, it's going to have to adjust that estimate later on when the cue appears. So it might adjust it backwards or forwards a little bit if the cue appears earlier or later than expected.
So presumably this tells you something about the signature of the systematic error it would be making.
It could make a systematic error. It could also do a rapid adjustment after the cue appears to
I see
account for that error.
It's something to do with the signature of the error would be like statistically different if it was doing that as opposed to the other ones. Is that?
Behaviorally, we can't tell them apart. Behaviorally, the monkey can perform perfectly with all of these strategies. It just might require a rapid computation when the cue appears. So after the invisible phase in the anticipation hypothesis, the monkey might have to adjust. The monkey might have to think, oh, the cue happened really early. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. My anticipated position is too far ahead. And it might do that very rapidly when the cue appears based off of whether the cue was earlier or later than expected.
But it would look different, that adjustment, than what it would have to do for procrastination, for example.
It would be a different adjustment, and that would present itself differently in the brain. So the brain activity would be different.
I got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. These are great questions.
So I have a question.
Please.
Would you sort of pretty much expect the actual response to be a linear combination of these, or maybe not even a linear combination of them, but something you can test and try to find a statistical model?
Yes. So do you mean in the behavior of the monkey or in the monkey's neural activity?
The mental position.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that. And actually, to spoil things, none of these hypotheses are quite right. And the brain is some combination of them. But we're going to see that later on.
Okay.
Your intuition is spot on, though. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about testing these in neural data. The way we do this is we insert electrodes into the brain, in particular dorsal prefrontal cortex, which is our area of interest. And we recorded about 6,000 neurons from 2 monkeys. I want to give a big shout out to Jack Gable, who is my collaborator and who recorded from one of the 2 monkeys. To give you a sense of the neural data, I want to show the behavioral video that I showed earlier. So you're going to watch the monkey playing the task, but this time I'm also going to show you the activity of 3 neurons during the task. I'll display them at the bottom of the screen, and you'll also hear their spikes with auditory clicks. One of them will be low-pitched, one medium-pitched, and one high-pitched. So take a listen, take a look, and see what you think. Can you give me a thumbs up that the audio is working? I'm going to pause it for a second. You are listening to real neurons of a monkey doing this task. And you might have already found some patterns. You might notice that one of them fires more when the object's visible, another one fires more when the object is invisible, and the third one fires a burst of spikes often when the monkey moves its eyes, depending on which direction the monkey looks. Let's listen to a few more trials. All right, last one. Okay, well, that's what neural activity sounds like.
Nick,
Yes.
I think I'm convinced that the higher pitch happens at the moment when it makes a guess or something. Is that true?
That's true. The high-pitched one fires mostly when the monkey moves its eyes.
Okay.
So I wanted to quickly tell you something I saw on Facebook yesterday. It was a video of that somebody attached a mushroom to wires to sense its activity. And it's not neural activity in a brain, but it translated it into moving some uh, drumsticks to play a xylophone, so you hear music, which I think was very interesting. But it's a related idea, but not neural activity. It's chemical activity, right? Biochemical.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Cool.
I wonder, yeah, I mean, just to build on that, I wonder if neural activity, if anyone has used neural activity to create music, which might be fun.
Yeah, there are lots of neurons in the brain. You might get some pretty rich music out of it. So yeah, as Ted observed, some of these neurons that we just listened to have noticeable patterns. However, it's kind of hard to interpret them just by looking and listening to them on a moment-by-moment basis. By averaging neural activity over trials, we can get a better sense of what they're doing. So to do this, I'm going to show you the visual display that the monkey's looking at, and I'm going to color each quadrant a different shade of gray, depending on which quadrant the object was in when it disappeared. We can then plot the activity of a neuron, the firing rate of a neuron, as a function of time, conditioned on these quadrants. So here's one of the neurons that we recorded, and you can see that this neuron has higher firing rate for conditions where the object was on the top half of the screen in both the stimulus and invisible phases of the task. The y-axis is the firing rate of the neuron, and the x-axis is the time after the start of every trial. On the right is another neuron. So this neuron has higher curves, higher firing rate for trials where the object was on the bottom half of the screen in both stimulus and invisible phases. Broadly, if we look at all the neurons that we recorded, we find different neurons show diverse patterns of modulation, both in terms of space, where the object is, and also in terms of time, whether they fire more in the stimulus phase or the invisible phase or something else. Okay. That's kind of all I have to say about recording neural activity. Are there any questions before we talk about modeling this neural activity?
Yeah, I wonder, do we know when you place well, I guess it's two related questions. When you place the recording electrodes, how specific are you in the placement in terms of the location? And then do you know anything about the connectivity between the neurons that you're recording from, or their relative nearness at least?
These are both great questions. In terms of electrode placement, we can place the electrodes fairly accurately within a few hundred microns. We know where the electrode is. However, we don't know which specific cell the electrode is next to. That's too fine a spatial scale for us to know. Also, the cells, the neurons in these areas are heterogeneous. So you'll get one cell that's tuned to an object on the left half of the screen, and then right next to it, 10 microns away, there might be another cell that's tuned to an object on the right half of the screen. So there's some broad topography across the brain, but there's also a lot of heterogeneity in terms of where neurons are. As far as connectivity, sorry?
So I was going to say, so this is something you need to take into consideration in the analysis, right? Like some...
It is. We can't rely on where the neurons are in the brain to tell us very much.
And what about
as far as the connectivity question goes, we don't know the connectivity. This is a limitation of electrophysiology, of putting wires in the brain in an awake behaving animal. We don't know which neuron is connected to which other neuron. Some folks have tried to infer that based off of activity. That's kind of difficult, and I haven't done that.
Yeah, like sort of correlation, studies or things like that. I guess if you could, and not that you've done this, but theoretically, these electrodes, could they also stimulate neurons, so that you could do a input-output type of test?
Yes, there are techniques to do that. I didn't do that in this experiment, but that's one way to get some sense of connectivity. Stimulate one area, record from another area, and see which neurons respond specifically to the stimulation, so you know there's a connection.
So I wonder if something like what you'd like to do in terms of that connectivity could be approached the way that geneticists approach the mapping of the gene of a genome. So they have two different kind of distances. You've got the distance along the genome, which is a physical connectivity type of measurement, and then you've got the distance in terms of generational mapping that I don't remember the name of it. It's a phenotypic distance, I guess, which has more to do with the expression of the genes rather than the physical location along the helix. And so perhaps some sort of mapping in terms of the stimuli to which and the responses would be just about as useful as phenotypic connectivity information would be to geneticists. Partly because you have perhaps more than one part of the brain that responds to the same object in the same image.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
which is like the correlation that Ted mentioned a moment ago, that you could have correlation without connection, without physical connection.
Yes, this is a good point, and I think I like the analogy to genetic connectivity and similarity. There are some nice experimental tricks that we can do in the brain. For example, there is a way to measure if there is a direct single neuron connection from one area to another. Because of the way neurons communicate, you can look at the latency of the response, and that can actually tell you how distal the true connection is. So there's some ways to get at this, but it's really difficult. And the brain has so many neurons that even measuring this connectivity with the best experimental techniques, it's kind of sparse.
Right.
Thank
you.
These are great questions, and connectivity analysis is something that I hope is done more in the future, and it would be really informative. For now, though, we don't have that data, so we have to treat each neuron as its own cell, and we don't know which is connected to which. So from the activity that we looked at so far,
just
kind of hard.
So therefore, just to understand the data that you do have, I'm glad that you brought this down to this. So the data is a collection of spikes, basically. Like, I mean, the pitch was incidental for us to hear. It's not there. It just, so you have a bunch of spikes, so different frequencies, let's say, of spiking at over time and for different neurons, right?
Yes, so we have a big list of neurons, 6,000 neurons, and for each of them, we have the time at which that neuron fired throughout the whole recording session.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Do we have any sense of endogenous dynamics for each neuron? For example, that once it fires, it'll fire 5 times in a row, for example, so that we don't overinterpret the specific spikes.
We can do cross-correlation analyses and higher order statistical models of that. That's not something I'm going to talk about in this talk, but those are useful tools. And yeah, we can do that. We can also, there are a whole bunch of things, like we can measure the neural activity in the intertrial interval or a time when the monkey's not playing the task to get a sense of baseline statistics and use that to inform the models.
So for now, though, for your analysis, you're treating each individual spike as potentially meaningful.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So let's talk about modeling. From the neural data alone, just looking at it, it's hard to tell what the monkey's thinking. It's hard to tell if there's simulation, anticipation, or procrastination. To test those hypotheses, we need to build computational models. So I'm going to talk about modeling a neuron's activity in the invisible phase of the task. And I'm going to model a neuron's activity with two components. The first component is some spatial modulation function. Let's call it S of the mental position of the object. In this cartoon, I'm using a kind of heat map to show high luminance where there's high firing rate coming from spatial modulation. This neuron is tuned to when there's an object in the lower region of the screen. Let's also suppose that our hypothetical neuron has some temporal modulation. We can call it T. And this modulates how high the firing rate is as a function of time, irrespective of the stimulus or where the object is, just some baseline temporal modulation. Now consider a trial where the object's moving along this red arrow, and consider the simulation hypothesis, where the mental position follows the motion of the object. Under that hypothesis, the spatial modulation would give rise to a firing rate that looks like this blue curve at the bottom. Because the mental position of the object moves through the receptive field of the neuron, through this light activity bump in space, that causes a bump in firing rate over time for this particular trial under the simulation hypothesis.
Nick, are we okay to think about this as basically, here's some mental effort essentially that this neuron is doing because it's trying to, according to this hypothesis, it's just doing more thinking, let's say, and so the firing rate would correlate with that, and then at some point it is given more data, so now it doesn't have to think that much anymore, type of thing.
I'm not sure what you mean about given more data and thinking less. In this slide, I'm just trying to describe the firing rate on a particular trial, but maybe you can help me understand what you mean better.
Right. Yes. Thank you for asking. I know, I was trying to express an idea that inadequately, I think, with words, but essentially, I guess the distinction I'm asking you to make is whether this is entirely phenomenological, what you're just saying. In other words, is it just you have a curve that goes, in this case, it happens to be measuring firing rate because that's the thing you're measuring, that you're saying, oh, it goes up first and then down, just like in reverse correlation almost to the fact that it's visible, then it's not visible, then it's visible again. So is it like entirely phenomenological, or is there some kind of dynamics that you're implying behind the scenes, that there's, let's say, a peak of computation that needs to happen in the middle, and that's why the firing rate goes up, because there's this computation going on, type of thing?
I see what you're saying. Yes. So this firing rate that goes up and down is the product of the particular model that we're considering. So in a model where the neuron has high firing rate during this, let me go back to the spatial modulation function. In a model where a neuron has high firing rate around this light bump in space, and under a trial condition where the object happens on this trial to move through that region of space, this will cause the activity of the neuron to increase when the object is passing through that region of space. So the blue curve at the bottom is modeling the predicted firing rate of this model given this particular spatial modulation function.
I'm glad I asked the question then, and thank you for clarifying it. This is not what I was thinking. I hadn't heard carefully enough what you said. So let me rephrase now. Hopefully, we're going to nail it. You're positing that there is one of those thousands of neurons that you're measuring has a receptive field that would be activated if the thing it was observing happened to pass through its receptive field, which is right here in the middle, the white part. And so it's sitting quiescent, or mostly quiescent, whatever, is a baseline thing all the time. And then if the hypothesis of the simulation was correct, that would mean that in the simulation, the part of the brain that's creating the simulation would have essentially stimulated the receptive field of that putative neuron, and therefore that putative neuron would have spiked because it would have been stimulated by the simulated position of the thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's really well put. Thanks for clarifying. Is everybody else on board with this? Are there other questions about what's going on here?
I don't have a question about what's going on, but exactly. But at this slide, for some reason, I got brought to the following question about the overall project. Have you used some of the mathematics developed around pursuit problems to model some of this as well? There are entire books on discrete pursuit problems and on differential pursuit problems. Some of them are, I think, called differential games books, but they have differential studies of, and I'm thinking of that in terms of the monkey pursuing the object as it moves. And so you can model it like a predator-prey pursuit problem. That's what I was wondering, is if you have done any of that kind of modeling. I'm sorry to go back so far in the presentation.
No, that's a great question. Thank you. I haven't, and I'm not very familiar with those areas of math, but I would love to hear more about it, maybe offline or at the end, because it does sound really relevant. Yeah, thanks. So as far as this hypothesis goes, we have a predicted firing rate of the neuron, and we can add to this the temporal modulation to get a total response of this neuron. This total response on this particular trial is the spatial modulation function of the mental position as a function of time, plus the temporal modulation as a function of time. And it looks like the sum of the bump coming from spatial modulation and the ramp coming from temporal modulation. Now, let's take this same hypothetical neuron with the same spatial and temporal modulation and consider the procrastination hypothesis. In this hypothesis, during the invisible phase of the task, the mental position does not track the position of the object. It stays where the object was when it disappeared. So the spatial modulation function of this purple or dark blue ring would just be a low constant firing rate because it's outside of the receptive field of the neuron, and the total response would look like this dark blue ramp that you see on the right.
Essentially, you're saying that to build on the previous statement that I made, that if the procrastination was what was happening, this neuron would never be excited because, you know, there's never a simulation that passes through its receptive field. It just
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. In contrast, for the anticipation hypothesis, the mental position of the object stays at the expected future position of the object, which, suppose for this case, it's where the green circle is. That is near the receptive field of the neuron, so that would cause a constant spatial modulation throughout the invisible phase of the task, which, when summed with the temporal modulation, would give rise to the green ramp on the right side. So each of these hypotheses has a different prediction for the mental position of the object when the object's invisible. And each of those mental trajectories gives rise to a different predicted response of this particular neuron for this particular trial. So this is in this way, we can test the hypotheses. We can see, is the blue curve or the cyan curve or the green curve more similar to the actual measured firing rate of the neuron on this trial? Now, to do that, we had the spatial modulation and the temporal modulation functions, which are particular to individual neurons. So to test these hypotheses, we're going to have to fit each of these models to neural data. So for every trial, well, let's consider a single neuron. For a single neuron, we have a temporal modulation function and a spatial modulation function. And on every trial, these then predict a response of that neuron. In this case that we were looking at earlier, under the simulation hypothesis, we get the blue curve on the right. Given the same spatial and temporal modulation for a different trial where the object is moving in a different trajectory, these would give a different response. In this case, the object moves from near the receptive field of the neuron away. So the spatial modulation would go down over time. Adding the temporal modulation would give this blue curve in the bottom right. We can then compare these to the measured activity of a neuron in the brain and evaluate the similarity between the model firing rate and the brain firing rate. We can then use that similarity to optimize the temporal and spatial modulation functions to maximize the similarity over all trials between the model's predicted responses for a particular neuron and the brain responses for that neuron. So for a particular neuron, we fit its temporal and spatial modulation functions under each hypothesis, simulation, procrastination, and anticipation, to best match the brain activity and the model activity.
Just incidentally, is this some sort of parametric fitting? Is it like a maximum likelihood, or what type of?
Yeah, it's a maximum likelihood. So we use Poisson log likelihood and do ML. Yeah.
So that's what you're using to measure the similarity?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm wondering if you can get perhaps some better results if you look at some things in continuum theory like hyperspace metrics to do the similarity measures. The distance between so these curves can be viewed as closed subsets of a continuum, like the unit square or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the distance between two of them, well, there's different metrics. One of them is the Hausdorff metric. Another one is, well, there's a large number of them and I wrote some papers with a topologist on this, and I wonder if you could consider looking at such things, because they might help you to get better measures of similarity and dissimilarity. Yeah.
That's a good idea. I'll say that the only things I've tried so far are Poisson likelihood, mean squared error, and binary cross entropy. But maybe a continuous metric would also be interesting. Those three metrics that I've tried so far have all given similar results. And I'll also mention that the red curves on the right are a little misleading. In actuality, we just have kind of impulses for when the neuron fires times. So we don't actually have curves from the brain. We just have
These though have discretized versions as well. So for use in computation. Yeah.
I'm curious to learn more about these. They sound like could be relevant. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, so now I'm going to show you some results. We fit the models on the data, we then evaluate them on held out test sets, and this is what we get. What we're looking at are for the two monkeys. Each plot shows the test likelihood of each of the three models over all neurons. And broadly, what you see is that for both monkeys, the anticipation hypothesis has higher likelihood than the simulation and procrastination hypotheses. Okay, there's our result. The brain is more consistent with anticipation than procrastination or simulation. Now,
wait, P and E are two different monkeys, or?
Yes, two different monkeys. Now, we could call it a day, but we don't want to call it a day because, well, I spoiled us earlier by saying that none of these hypotheses are exactly what the brain is doing. And after this, we wanted to expand the hypothesis space and get a better sense of what's really going on. So let's talk about expanding the hypothesis space. First, I want you to notice that procrastination, simulation, and anticipation all are special cases of the same class of models, which posits there's a linear relationship between the mental position and the true position when the object is invisible. So what we can do is we can fit a more general model that infers the linear relationship between mental and true position that best matches the neural data. So here we're allowing the mental position as a function of time to be the real position as a function of some linear function of time with an intercept and slope that's fit to the data along with the spatial and temporal modulation functions for every neuron. When we do that, we get the red curve, the red line that you see in this plot. The thin little lines are for individual bootstraps. The solid lines are the average. And you can see that the linear function inferred by the neural data lies somewhere between simulation and anticipation, a little closer to anticipation. So this is more, here we're kind of backing out from the neural data what's going on, and we find some combination of anticipation and simulation.
Can I just ask a quick question? Presumably, the reason why you are sticking with linear functions is entirely analytical. It's not, in other words, my prior would be that maybe, you know, the longer the gap is, it might, the relative slope might change, how much you're anticipating versus how much you're simulating.
Ted, I'm so glad you asked, and your intuition is spot on. Here's what happens when we allow a nonlinear function from mental position to true position. And you can see, as you intuited, that the slope does change a little bit. It kind of flattens out as time goes on. So this gets us a little closer to what the brain's actually doing. I'll summarize this by saying that monkeys have positive bias, so some element of anticipation, and also positive slope, some element of simulation. Okay. I want to now show you intuitively what this looks like in the context of the task. So here are the videos from before where we can see each of the hypotheses, their mental position in this trial. And on the right, I'm showing you the inferred mental position from the result we just saw. And you can see that the red ring showing the inferred mental position from neural data kind of jumps ahead a little bit, but also continues to track ahead, continues to move ahead as well. Some combination of anticipation and simulation. Okay, so this is what the data tells us the monkey is thinking. I want to, this is the last result I'll show. I want to touch on one more thing, which is to ask whether the neural latent variables that we're inferring from the brain activity with these models are behaviorally relevant. Do they predict behavior? So to get at that, first notice that on every single trial, the monkey's response has some error. In particular, we can take the monkey's response, shown by the green cross, we can project it onto the trajectory of the object, and we can measure whether it was too far ahead or too far behind the object. So the reason we're projecting onto the object is to get a one-dimensional measure that you think might be related to whether the monkey's imagining the object further ahead or further behind. We can also consider a slight modification of the linear timescale model, where we allow the intercept and the slope to be fit independently for each trial. So every single trial the monkey does, we take the brain data and we fit a different slope and intercept for that trial, based off of all the activity of all the neurons we record. Then we can consider the neural endpoint at the end of that trial as a measure of how far ahead in the monkey's mind the object is on that trial. And we find that these two are correlated. We find that the inferred mental position of the object varies across trials. Sometimes the monkey's imagining it further ahead, sometimes further behind, and that actually predicts the subsequent behavior of the monkey, whether the response is further ahead or further behind the object. So the upshot here is that we can read the monkey's mind on single trials. We can infer from the brain activity something that's correlated with the subsequent behavior of the monkey. This gives us more confidence that our modeling is not reading tea leaves, but is inferring something meaningful in neural activity. Any questions on all this so far? Okay, I want to take a step
Sorry,
back.
I did have a very quick question this time. I somehow missed what the units are on the bottom scale. MS, what's that mean?
Yes, thank you. That's milliseconds.
So by position,
And this,
so that's confusing to me because I was thinking millisecond that the units
this is
would be
a good question. Let me try to clarify. So in these models, we're modeling the position. We're really modeling a time warping function. We're modeling, does the monkey's mental simulation of the object move faster or slower than the object, or ahead of the object or behind the object? So
Okay.
really, all of these are in terms of time. We can then map time to position by projecting them onto the path of the object. Um, so
But if the object takes a different path, do you get different results? That's part of what I'm headed for here is you might, for a monkey that's never been through this yet, you might get different results if the path is different. But if they've already been through it, there'd be probably some training related correlations that would affect the study. That's
yes, these monkeys have been trained extensively on the task, so they're well practiced.
okay.
And it could be that a monkey that hasn't been trained on this task would show something very different here.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you. I thought it'd be a short question, but it was longer than I expected.
no, it's a good question. Thanks.
Don't want to mess up the timing here.
Nick, I also have a related question. I wonder if there are instances, or if you tested this, where where essentially the monkey understands there are reflecting boundaries. In other words, where the where the invisible phase included a bounce.
Great question. This is uh, this is something I didn't want to get into in this talk, but yes, there's some complexity around that. To give you the short answer, the monkeys definitely know about the bounces. They 100% take into account the bounces, even when the object's invisible, in their responses. The neural correlates of that, so how the bounce works in the brain, we're not 100% sure.
But they're smart. They get something about reflection. That's
They
amazing.
can predict it, they totally get it. We don't know exactly how that's done in the brain. That's that's a great question.
So you need to get the monkeys to play billiards now.
Oh, now you're talking. Yeah.
Actually, yes. No, two things, two objects that might
Wait, Ted, you
intersect.
are predicting what I'm doing. I'm
Okay,
getting
never mind.
it.
Remember, you're no longer my student. You
That-
do it your own way.
But that
You're-
also means, Nick, you're becoming a good teacher.
well, no. Wait a few slides, Ted. I'm getting to two objects. Two slides. I just want to take a step back and summarize what we did. Step one is we built interpretable models of neural activity. We modeled the neural activity as a function of interpretable latents, like the position of the object and the mental position and the time and stuff like that. Then we compared model fits to the brain to test hypotheses and then determine which model was more consistent with the brain. And the last thing we did was we showed that model latent variables inferred from neural activity predict behavior. So they're actually behaviorally meaningful. And these three steps, I think, are all kind of really important for understanding how the brain gives rise to behavior. Okay, that's data analysis and modeling. Now, surprise, more science before we get on to future directions. I do have a little bit more science to talk about, but I also realize that we're running a little short on time. So I'm going to briefly talk about two-object mental tracking, but I won't show any of the results. and then I'll wrap up.
Yeah, we'll
So
just have to get you back anyway. Go on.
as
We can take maybe 10 more minutes or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just talk about this in words a little bit. So as Ted intuited, we did study multi-object mental tracking, in particular the same task, but with two objects. In this case, the objects actually didn't bounce off of each other. That's something we didn't explore. They just moved independently. So it's exactly the same task, except the stimulus has two objects. These objects each move along paths independent from each other, but they both bounce off the walls of the arena. They become invisible. Then the cue appears, which shows the image of one of the objects, and that tells the monkey to respond to that particular object. So that's how we cue the monkey. And in this task, the monkey should mentally track both objects because it doesn't know which one it's going to be cued. I'm going to skip over the modeling for this. I'll just say in words a couple of interesting things that we found. First, we found some capacity limitations in the brain. Actually, maybe I will show this modeling. I'll just skip the neural activity. So let's talk about modeling two-object mental tracking. We tried a few models. I'll talk about one of them. And the idea here is that each of the two objects is tracked with its own slope and intercept. And also, let's suppose that attentional resources may be distributed unequally between the two objects. So here's a schematic of the model. Given the trajectories of the objects when they're invisible, we assume that each object has its own slope and intercept on a particular trial. So after scaling by that slope and intercept, we get mental trajectories for each of the objects. Then those pass through our spatial modulation function, which is also fit on a per neuron basis, to predict per object firing rates coming from each of the two objects. So how much each of them contributes to the firing rate of the neuron. And then there's this attentional function where we weight those firing rates by attentional variables, per object attention weights. Then we take those weighted firing rates, add them up, add the temporal modulation, and that gives us a predicted firing rate. So I know I walked through that kind of quickly, but the idea is we have each object having its own slope and intercept, its own independent simulation, and the contributions of those two objects on firing rate are summed, weighted by some attention, which captures whether the monkey is attending more to one or the other object.
Importantly, that weighting is literally a weighted average. It's not, a certain percent of the time I'm doing only one, and then I switch, and certain percent of the time I only do the other.
Correct.
Yes.
It's a weighted average.
And
and
it
in
would
the
look
equation,
not
there's
linear.
a first term, which is the weight of object one times the spatial modulation function of object one, plus the weight of object two times spatial modulation of object two, plus the temporal baseline. This model has a bunch of variables. It has variables that are fit per neuron, the spatial and temporal modulation functions. It also has variables that are fit per trial. So for every trial, we fit the intercepts and slopes associated with the simulation of the two objects, and also the weights associated with the two objects.
So sorry.
Yes.
Do you need so did you need more probes when you had two objects? Or I mean, because maybe one object is tracked with one collection of neurons and another one with a different collection of neurons. That would be a concern I would have.
Yes. So when we recorded many neurons from kind of all across the cortex.
Oh, okay.
We weren't able to, we kind of recorded at our maximum capacity and weren't able to record more neurons for these conditions, but we still recorded a bunch of neurons.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So a couple of things came out of this. First is that the attentional weights are anti-correlated. So if the weight on object one is high, then the weight on object two is low, and vice versa. This could be consistent with some limited attentional resources in the brain that are distributed across objects. A second thing we found is that the mental tracking functions are anti-correlated. So if the linear function for object 1 ends higher, so ends simulating object 1 further ahead, then the linear function for object 2 ends further behind. And these are anti-correlated, which is something that kind of surprised us. If you had asked me beforehand, I wouldn't have guessed this. I would have expected if you simulate one object far ahead, you might also be simulating the other object far ahead. Like maybe your clock is faster on that trial and they're correlated. Turns out that's not the case. If the clock is faster for one object, it's slower for the other object. This could be related to some bottleneck of dynamic capacity in the brain. Could be related to more general bottlenecks of dynamic computations in the brain, like your inability to catch two baseballs that are thrown at you or pay attention to two conversations, something like that. That's speculation, but the anti-correlation comes out of the data.
But again, this is just a weight. It's not literal. You said over time, but I wanted to see whether your model, it doesn't sound like your model can distinguish between whether each neuron is spending time doing only one thing and then switching to the other thing, right?
Yes.
That's not something you tested.
That's not something that's in this model, and that's a good question, which is that these resources could be distributed by partitioning in time, like focusing on one, then focusing on the other, something like that.
Right.
That's not in these models, but we're writing a paper, and we have more models that include temporal switching models that we also explored. I'm not getting into that in this presentation, though. We don't think that's happening. The upshot is we don't find evidence for switching within a trial between objects.
Did you check with other objects and see if color of the object makes a difference? So you had two different colors there.
Yes.
And I'm thinking also about the color of the background and contrast and so forth. Of course, if there's no difference between the object color and the background color, it's much harder to track. I would, at least that would be my theory. I presume you'd find evidence for that in the trials. But if you have lower contrast, like the blue one has lower contrast with the background there than the yellow one, you might, I don't know if you saw anything in the data that would indicate that the yellow one's easier to track. The blue one's harder.
It's a good question. We used 3 objects, a yellow one, a blue one, and a red one, and we didn't see any difference between those in either behavior, the monkey's performance on them, or in neural activity. But that may have been because of something you brought up earlier, which is these monkeys were trained for a while on these objects and were very used to it. They're also all relatively salient, so it might be that a monkey that's less well trained or objects that are particularly dim could give differences. We just didn't look at that.
Okay, let's give Nick maybe 5 minutes, if possible, to just tell us a little bit about AI, because I want to draw that connection. Thank you, Nick.
I will do that now. So let's talk about future directions. Future directions in neuroscience. I am optimistic about the future of systems neuroscience. I think with increasing data scale and combining that with rigorous modeling, there are a lot of cognitive capacities that we could study. Here are some that I'm excited about. One is motor sequences. Imagine typing your phone passcode. How does that work? You can imagine a bunch of hypotheses for how the brain does this chaining of motor commands. And I think that's ripe to be tested. Another cognitive capacity that I'm interested in is flexible generalization. Anybody who's experienced a Boston winter is probably familiar with typing your phone passcode with your nose when you're outside and your hands are in your winter gloves. That is pretty interesting generalization. Your motor plan for typing your phone passcode with your nose is completely different from when you do it with your finger, but we generalize no problem. So this indicates that the way in which we're thinking about the passcode, the way in which we're planning the motor sequence, has a more abstract component than just the muscle movements to type it. And I think that's ripe for study and modeling. Another aspect to relate it again to the phone passcode is rapid learning. Somebody can tell you their passcode and you can translate that into a motor plan and remember it for a long time, even if they only tell it to you once. And I think that's that kind of rapid learning is something that is really interesting to study and model in the brain. As far as applications to AI goes, all of these could have implications for AI. So if we test models and hypotheses in the brain and we find some constraints that the brain abides, those could be useful constraints for artificial models. However, I'll say that for AI, I'm particularly interested in physical intelligence and robotics. So monkeys have really good physical intelligence. You can look at this monkey carrying away a hubcap. It's probably the first time the monkey has ever carried a hubcap, and it's pretty good at it. It has no problem figuring out how to grasp it, orient it, lift it up, balance while walking on two legs with it. It's very good physical intelligence. In the meantime, even our state-of-the-art robots struggle with simple motor tasks like closing an egg carton. And I think that this begs the possibility of using neural data to supervise robots. So if we had a monkey trained to close egg cartons and we recorded its neural activity, that could be used as direct supervision for robotic models doing that same task. And that's something that I'm excited about and working on right now and going forward.
And with respect to this latter part, perhaps then the robot supposedly it's not just being controlled to do it, but is being supervised to learn to do it, right? Like in a neural network way.
Exactly.
Sort of training its neural network to do that. Okay. Well, first of all, let's thank Nick.
First, I want to thank everybody that contributed to this project, particularly my collaborator, Jack Gable, my advisors, Merida Jazzieri and Josh Tenenbaum, and the whole Jazzieri lab. And thank all of you for your attention and interesting questions.
All right. Okay, hold on. Let's thank Nick. And yeah, Irfan, you can stop the live stream now. And if people are available to stay for a little longer on the Zoom, we could ask Nick a couple more questions, perhaps, if you're available, Nick, as well.
I'm available, yeah.